The next speaker is Henrik Sandklef, consultant at Intel.
Not consultant.
Okay, working at Intel. And he will explain us the new strategy for classifying licenses in a better way. Welcome on stage.
Thanks. So it's tough here. So should I wear my glasses? And I want to see that, but otherwise I can't see my notes. So I've written in quite big fonts. It says I've been involved. I live in Gothenburg, Sweden. I've been involved in the GNU project, FSFE, for a couple of years. I'm working with Alexios in the Intel OSPO. So let's get started. So at some point, it felt as if I'm building a house this way. So I've only built an elevator, and I'm trying to claim that this is a house. Let's see if I'm right. I need to walk, but I can't do it here, so I'll try. So first of all, it's not that important with compatibility. It's not, compatibility is just a subset of what compliance is. Compliance is not free and open source software, but I'd say FOSS is the best, and that's like my way of quoting Frank Zappa, so I managed to squeeze him in here. There's a couple of license compatibility approaches, and where are we now? So we have a couple of license matrices. There's a new boy or a new kid in town. The second one here, but let's look at what a license compatibility matrix is. So in one way you need, when you create a work, you want to put a license on the combined work. So it's the outgoing license, the outbound license compatible with the inbound licenses, that is the components you're using. So you can use this matrix. It's not really made for humans. It should be used by a computer, but this is it. But you can see it's fairly complicated. So the more licenses you support, the bigger the matrix gets. So it's going to be tough. And here's a really bad joke. So some got it. So this is a license matrix. Sorry. I couldn't resist. There's some other approaches, and it's license graphs. So you can follow. So can I use public domain, a component on a public domain in an Affero license product? If you can follow the arrows to the Affero, then you can use it. So this is one approach. The questions an OSPO get, the question probably some of you either have asked or get is license A compatible with license B? Is GPL compatible with Apache 2, for example? And who knows? Context. It's all about the context. Without the context, I have no idea. So I can't answer. For example, do you use it internally? It's just local use? Or do you put it as a software as a service? Do you put it in a vehicle? Do you do binary distribution? Do you do source code? There's a couple of context things we need to bring up. And how do you use it? So if you use a GPL component as a compiler, what's the license of the output? Blah, 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 blah. There's always context. There's always context. So you cannot look at, we're using GCC. Is it that compatible with Apache? Well, it depends on. We had a discussion last night where we said depends on a couple of times. Is your software modified or not modified? Etc. So there's always going to be a bit of context. So I'm not saying the context is missing, since I showed you more or less the OSADL license matrix. They are quite explicit in the context of the matrix. So, but usually in the question we miss information. So keep this in mind. And if you fall asleep, I'm not used to it, but I don't blame you. Looking ahead, so what is a license? And I would never dare to say what a license is in this room, given the people that are here. However, if we think of a license something like this, it's clauses, terms, obligations, blah, 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 that are triggered in, for example, a provisioning case. If you use GPL and Apache, for example, and you don't distribute it, and if then it may not trigger. So if we think about a license as a couple of clauses, and each clause has a couple of triggers, this is to make things easier. So this is my project, and for copyright reasons, I couldn't take a photo from the internet of Hermione. So I bought a Hermione, or Harry Potter set, took out Hermione and took a photo. This should be okay. The idea is that Hermione, my project, is adding a project which adds data on top of another project called, I see some French-speaking people here, Hermine Data. Hermine Data is what I call it in my head. So they've basically done the classification of licenses the way I would like to do them. So I'm trying to add data to that. But again, I'm not claiming to build a house. This is a proof of concept where the P is slightly, so it's more like a roof of concepts. So Hermine, they have classified licenses with obligations and the triggers. So I'm adding a bit of, compatibility, not between licenses, because then we end up in a matrix with 4 million values or something, but the compatibility between the obligations or the terms or the clauses. So it's going to be a matrix, I thought. It's going to change, but this is the initial idea. And thank Alberto for all your time and efforts answering my stupid questions and for your feedback. So this was the idea, but at some point I noticed that usually the obligations are trivial. They always give you, yeah, it's okay, yeah, it's okay, yeah, it's okay. So I noticed that, perhaps I can do a different approach here. So I assumed, please, not this angle. So I assumed that the default is yes, and I specify the not yeses. And how do I do that? So if we look at BSD using GPL2, so all the clauses in BSD 3 clause need to be compared, for example, with one of the terms or one of the clauses or whatever in GPL v2. And that's a copyleft strong. That's Hermine's word. So if you use a component which has copyleft strong, it may or may not be compatible. It depends on sort of the license which is using the GPL v2 component. So a GPL v2 component using GPL v2 component, that's perfectly fine. So if the inbound license and outbound license are the same, then it's okay. So I had to create, like, if somebody written a compiler here for a language, you'd be crying if I say that I've invented a licensed language, but it is sort of a licensed language. Another tricky thing here is GPL v2 has the clause, we're not allowed to add further restrictions. So if I check that obligation against provide license text, yeah, no problem at all. It's not problematic because it's already in GPL v2. So what I'm saying here is I'm checking the obligation, no further restrictions in GPL. Is that compatible with the inbound obligation provide license text? Yes, it's compatible because provide license text is already part of GPL v2. So it's fine. However, if I use the GPL v2 component, I go through all the obligations and I come to no further restrictions, and I see, I compare with Apache again. Apache has a term, clause, obligation saying a patent clause. Let's keep it that way. So is that part of GPL v2? No, it's not part. Then it cannot be compatible. Depending on the context. Oh no. So what I added was a matrix with values and license expressions, the one if inbound license is the same as outbound license, if this adds a restriction, etc. That's a couple of like things you can do with that language. I had to add support for exceptions because Hermine didn't seem to support that, as I understood it. We are in conversation, Hermine project and I. I had to add a value, a tag to an obligation, whether it is a restriction or not. And this is ugly because it means that the restriction is really GPL based. So I don't know. I don't like having specific, adding a restrictive tag to Apache because of GPL. But I haven't found another way. I had to deal with dual licenses in some way. So, for example, is GPL2 compatible with GPL v2 or later? So I had to sort of translate GPL v2 or later into 2 licenses, blah, blah, blah. There's no time to dive into this. So, for example, so if I see, so this is the specification, this is a rule. So this is written in JSON. It's not in Python code. It's totally in the JSON specification or the JSON matrix. So I can write, if I, my outbound expression is, if the outgoing license has the obligation, do not restrict the rights of the license, then I need to add, so the expression for me to check the incoming obligations, the expression to check is inbound obligation is not a restriction. And behind the scenes, that is translated into some Python code, and the quality of that code, let's not go into that. So from a user point of view, we need to know what is the use case, what is the provisioning case, do we modify it, the inbound license, the outbound license, and then the user gets, is it compatible or not, or here are the reasons why it's not compatible, which is kind of cool. So the results, or what do we get and what do we have to pay, I found that it suffices with 15 expressions. So my obligation matrix is 15 expressions between, obligations. I checked it. I can generate a license compatibility matrix for fast lookups. It's correct. I tested it. I compared it to a couple of license compatibility resources. I think we'll be winning readability, maintainability for sure. We will lose precision for sure, because you cannot say a GPL. We cannot reduce that, but we can do our best, and it's a proof of concept. So let's see. So the idea here is I've proven that it seems to work. Now we need to get started doing it for real. Here are the resources if you want to know. I need to clean up the code and create a new repo because you don't want to see my commit messages. But I'll clean this up and I'll publish it in a week or so.